Hola a todos y bienvenidos. Welcome back to Real Fast Spanish. In this video, you're going to learn about 10 common phrases that Spanish natives would never use. But these are phrases that students sometimes use because they are maybe literal translations from English, or there are logic traps that students sometimes fall into. Now, I put together a PDF of all 10 phrases plus 5 bonus phrases that you can download and use as a study reference. You'll find the link to the PDF in the description below. Now, the first thing that a Spanish native would never say would be, Nos vemos en martes. No, this is no good. In English, we say on Monday, on Tuesday, on the weekend, or even on the 12th of March. But in Spanish, on in these cases needs to simply be the, el. So, nos vemos el martes. See you on Tuesday. He's leaving on the 12th of March. Now, in English, we say on the, but in Spanish, we just got to drop that on. So we just say, se va el 12 de marzo. Next example, see you first thing on Monday morning. Nos vemos el lunes a primera hora.
Nos vemos el lunes a primera hora.
Now, the next thing that a Spanish native would never say would be this. Hice un error. I made a mistake. In English, we make mistakes, but in Spanish, we commit mistakes. So this needs to be cometí un error. For example, cometí un error y solo ustedes pueden ayudarme a rectificarlo.
Cometí un error y solo ustedes pueden ayudarme a rectificarlo.
Now, in addition to the phrase cometer un error, Spanish natives will sometimes use the verb equivocarse. Now, I was thinking of the best equivalent of equivocarse, and in English we have verb phrases like I messed up or I stuffed up. And I think this would be the best translation, but we could also translate equivocarse to I made a mistake. So, for example, I stuffed up again, or I messed up again. Otra vez, me equivoqué. Now, notice how when one word in Spanish ends in a vowel and the next word starts with the same vowel, these words tend to come together. So we don't say me equivoqué, we say me equivoqué. Otra vez, me equivoqué.
Otra vez me equivoqué.
Now the next phrase, estoy muy caliente. Now this one isn't strictly something that natives would never say, but they would never say it in the context in which students use it. Now we can use the word caliente when we want to talk about the temperature of things, of objects. So for example, the water is hot, el agua está caliente. But with people, we need to say, I'm hot, tengo calor. Or, aren't you hot? ¿No tienes calor? Now, if we do say, estoy caliente, or if someone asks you, ¿cómo estás? And you respond, muy caliente, this means horny. So, as I mentioned, natives could use this in the right context, but not in the context of feeling hot on a warm summer's day. Now, the next phrase or type of phrase that natives would never use is asking questions like this. ¿Quién estás hablando con? Now, in English, we almost always finish our questions with prepositions. So, who are you speaking with? Where are you from? What are you afraid of? Now, these translated into Spanish would need to be con quién hablas, de dónde eres, de qué tienes miedo. So, for example, besides, your family will be with you. What are you afraid of? Además, tu familia va a estar contigo, de qué tienes miedo.
Además, tu familia va a estar contigo. ¿De qué tienes miedo?
Now, the next phrase that Spanish natives will never use is this. La gente son. The people are. Now, this is a mistake that I've personally had trouble with. Now, it's just so tempting. In English, we say the people are. It is plural. But in Spanish, the word gente is singular. So we have to remember that. We have to practice it. So, la gente es. Always. So, for example, the people are very kind. La gente es muy amable. Now, the next phrase that you'll never hear a Spanish say is Gracias para. This is no good. We have to avoid this. This may be the most common mistake that I hear as a Spanish teacher. We have to say gracias por, gracias por, gracias por. And I've kind of made it a bit of a personal mission to try to get every student real fast Spanish saying gracias por. So for example, thanks for coming. Gracias por venir.
Gracias por venir.
Now the next phrase that you'll never hear a Spanish native use is this. Do you want another coffee? ¿Quieres un otro café? This sounds really bad. In Spanish, we have to avoid un otro. It doesn't exist. We have to say simply otro. So, ¿quieres otro café? Now, as an aside, I've mentioned this mistake on the channel before, and people sort of put in the comments, it's like, well, it's kind of obvious, right? It's kind of like in English, the word another is one word, and so in Spanish, it needs to be otro. But I think this is actually quite a logical mistake, if I'm to call it a logical mistake. An other kind of sounds like an followed by other. So there's this kind of like translation problem that can go through one's mind. But then we've also got the issue that we can say el otro in Spanish. So, for example, I visited him the other day. Lo visité el otro día. So, el otro is perfectly fine, but we need to avoid un otro. Now, the best way to deal with something like this, like everything in Spanish, is just to do some good quality practice on it. So, I want another coffee. Quiero otro café. I want another plate. Quiero otro plato. I want to see another movie. Quiero ver otra película. Now, if you've had issues with this mistake, if you've said un otro in the past, practice these sentences over and over and over again in your mind until they sound like the only correct option. Now, the next phrase on the list that a Spanish native would never use is this. Hay tan muchos coches aquí. There are so many cars here. Now, this doesn't sound good either. So you can think about the phrase so many. Now, this in Spanish isn't tan muchos. It can sort of contracts down. It needs to be tantos. So there's one word that kind of covers this so many idea, translating from English. So if you wanted to say there are so many cars here, you would say, hay tantos coches aquí. Hay tantos coches aquí. So another example, so many familiar faces, so many male friends, so many female friends. Tantas caras conocidas, tantos amigos, tantas amigas.
Tantas caras conocidas, tantos amigos, tantas amigas.
Now, the next phrase that you'll never hear a Spanish native use is this, buscar por. So, for example, I'm looking for my keys, busco por mis llaves. No, we can't say this. We could never say this. In English, we search for, we look for, but in Spanish, the verb buscar never has a preposition. So we need to say busco mis llaves. Busco mis llaves. Now, a tip that I sometimes give here to help students remember this is to actually think of the verb buscar as to seek. So I'm seeking my keys. With the verb seek in English, we don't have a preposition, and it can help remind you that we don't want to have a por or a para or something like that with buscar. So I'm seeking my keys, busco mis llaves. Another example, are you looking for this? ¿Buscas esto?
¿Buscas esto?
Now, the next example that a Spanish native would never say, I arrive in Mexico on Thursday. Llego en México en jueves. Now, this one combines the first mistake at the start of the video, but can you spot the other one? In Spanish, we can never say llegar en. In English, we say we arrive in places, we arrive in countries. I'm arriving in Lima on Thursday. I'm arriving in Mexico. I'm arriving in Spain. In Spanish, we arrive to. So we have to say, llego a México el jueves. Now, another situation might be like arriving on time. So again, it's tempting to want to use en here, but in Spanish, we need to say a tiempo. So for example, we have to hurry if we want to arrive on time. Tenemos que darnos prisa si queremos llegar a tiempo. So the link to the PDF with more examples of the phrases that we looked at today, plus 5 bonus phrases, will be in the description. If you have any questions, then please leave them in the comment section below, and please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, hasta pronto.